Welcome to Purpose Driven Church for Unificationists. We're on day 9 and we're covering myths about growing churches. We're on myth number 4, you must compromise the message and mission of the church in order to grow. So briefly, Rick Warren is talking here about people who assume that if a church is large, they must have sold out their message or watered down their message in some way. And he's saying it's just simply not true. Even though it might be true, but you could also have a small church that has a watered down message also, or is not teaching truthfully. And you might have a large church that's sold out on their values, or they're not teaching the Bible, but at the same time, his church, he's very confident that they do teach the word as the way it should be taught. And they've kind of been lumped into that same category just because they're all big churches. But he said if you look at Jesus' ministry, he oftentimes attracted large groups of people. He said not only did crowds of adults want to be around Jesus, so did young children. A Christ-like church will have the same drawing effect on people. He also goes on to talk about expectations about members. So he says that at Saddleback, they have two different groups of people, and they distinguish between them. One is the congregation, which are the members of people who've committed to joining the membership of the church. And then there's the crowd, people who are coming just to check it out because they've heard of Saddleback or because they're interested in Christianity, but they're not really ready to make a commitment. They're just interested. And so he says that they have very different expectations. For the people who are just looking, the so-called seekers, they have very little, they don't expect much of them. They don't expect them to act like members or to have that same kind of commitment. They just invite them to come and see it and try it and learn. But on the other hand, for the people who make the commitment to join, it's a major commitment. He says all prospective members must complete a membership class and are required to sign a membership covenant. By signing the covenant, members agree to give financially, serve in a ministry, share their faith, follow the leadership, avoid gossip, and maintain a godly lifestyle. Among other things, Saddleback practices church discipline, something rarely heard of today. If you do not fulfill the membership covenant, you are dropped from our membership. We remove hundreds of names from our roll every year. New members also agree to take additional classes where they will sign growth covenants that include tithing, having a daily quiet time, and participating weekly in a small group. One of the reasons Saddleback has not had a lot of transfer growth is because we expect so much more from our members than most other churches do. I've discovered that challenging people to a serious commitment actually attracts people rather than repels them. Many unbelievers are fed up and bored with what the world offers. They are looking for something greater than themselves, something worth giving their lives to. Asking for commitment doesn't turn people off. It is the way many churches ask for it. Too often, churches fail to explain the purpose, value, and benefits of commitment, and they have no process to help people take gradual steps in their commitment. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. But going on to finish off the myth, he talks about so-called the ambidextrous calling. He's talking about how, as Christians, or as people who are teaching the Word of God, we have an obligation to remain faithful to that teaching, but at the same time to recognize that the world is constantly changing, especially these days, and that people's needs and concerns and issues are constantly evolving, and we have to be aware of those things, and we have to adjust ourselves to address those things in a relevant way, but at the same time, not compromise on the message. So he's saying that many times what you see is people swing to one of two extremes. They'll either go to the point where they fear, he says, fearing worldly infection, retreat into isolation from today's culture. They don't quite go back to the days of the Amish, but they often go back to what he says, the golden age of the 1950s. And they're determined to preserve that era in their church. In contrast, churches that try to perpetuate the culture of the 1950s usually deny their intent, or they try to prove with proof text that they are doing it the way it was done in the New Testament age. So in a sense, kind of trying to protect ourselves, like that it was better back then, so let's just try to keep things that way, and we try to, come up with explanations of why it's better. On the other hand, sometimes what people try to do is they're afraid of becoming irrelevant, so they try to imitate the current fads and ways of doing things, and oftentimes in the process end up losing the value of their message or really teaching truth and transformation in people's lives. Now, going back to the part about expectations, I remember the first time I read this, it really struck me very strongly about this idea of commitment, because I recognize that we don't really expect much of people these days in our church. We're happy when people come, and we hope that they stay. And when young people who've been away from our movement or left our movement come back, we're happy about that. But it's really actually hard to expect commitment of people. We're afraid to ask much of them. We're worried that if we ask too much commitment or ask in the wrong way, that they'll get offended and they'll leave, and that we made a big mistake or something like that. But looking back on the history of our movement, a lot of the members who are here, who've stayed through a lot of the challenging and difficult times, were people that made a huge commitment. Maybe at first they studied the principle, and they came to some talks or some presentations, but at some point they made a huge commitment. Many of them gave up everything. They sold their cars and their valuables. They donated all their money to the church. They moved into the center, and before they knew it, they were fundraising in a van, or they were doing a mission, or they became a missionary in some overseas country. Maybe it was a communist country or something like that. And the actual amount of commitment that was expected of people was huge back then. And because that expectation was given of people, then I feel like that became people's treasure in their hearts. Like that was something that they gave their life to, and you can't value something more than giving your life to it. So it's just given me a lot of food for thought, because I don't want to be the church or a pastor that doesn't expect things of people or expect commitment of people, because I'm afraid of offending them or turning them off or something like that. And if it really does require a commitment, and through having a commitment, that people actually feel more inspired about what they're doing and inspired about being a part of the church, and gain more life, then I have to really consider what direction that we need to go in terms of our community and our movement and our church here locally. So that's just some food for thought, something to think about. And even the point that he says about, every year they take out hundreds of names from their roll. I mean, we wouldn't even imagine doing something like that, right? But they take the commitment so seriously, and that they're so serious that their members are actually living the kind of life that Saddleback is teaching them to live. Even the whole idea of not gossiping, it's a very principled perspective, I believe, because it comes down to living the life, not just coming to church and hearing words and maybe trying to live it if you want to or something like that, but not really making it a part of your life many times. So I really respect it a lot, and sorry I went longer than usual. I hope you appreciated this, and I'll see you tomorrow for day 10. Bye.